Hare Krishna, good morning. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 8, verses 39 through 43. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So text 39. The sage Maitreya continued. The great personality Narada Muni, upon hearing the words of Dhruva Maharaj, became very compassionate toward him, and in order to show him causeless mercy, he gave him the following expert advice. The great sage Narada told Dhruva Maharaj, the instruction given by your mother Sunīti to follow the path of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is just suitable for you. You should therefore completely absorb yourself in the devotional service of the Lord. Text 41. Any person who desires the fruits of the four principles, religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, liberation, should engage himself in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For worship of his lotus feet yields the fulfillment of all of these. Text 42. My dear boy, I therefore wish all good fortune for you. You should go back to the bank of the Yamuna, where there is a virtuous forest named Madhuvan, and there be purified. Just by going there, one draws nearer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who always lives there. Text 43. Narada Muni instructed, my dear boy, in the waters of the Yamuna River, which is known as Kalindi, you should take 3 baths daily, because the water is very auspicious, sacred, and clear. After bathing, you should perform the necessary regulative principles for Ashtanga Yoga, and then sit down on your asana, sitting place, in a calm and quiet position. I'm going to be reading from text 41, translation. Any person who desires the fruits of the 4 principles, religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, liberation, should engage himself in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For worship of his lotus feet yields the fulfillment of all of these. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that only with the sanction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead can the demigods offer benedictions. Therefore, whenever any sacrifice is offered to a demigod, the Supreme Lord in the form of Narayan Shila or Shalagram Shila is put forward to observe the sacrifice. Actually, the demigods cannot give any benediction without the sanction of the Supreme Lord. Narada Muni therefore advised that even for religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, or liberation, one should approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead, offer prayers, and ask for the fulfillment of one's desires at the lotus feet of the Lord. That is real intelligence. An intelligent person never goes to demigods to pray for anything. He goes directly to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all benediction. As Lord Sri Krishna has said in Bhagavad Gita, performance of ritualistic ceremonies is not actually religion. The real path of religion is to surrender at the lotus feet of the Lord. For one who is actually surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord, there is no question of any separate endeavor for economic development. A devotee engaged in service to the Lord is not disappointed in the satisfaction of his senses. If he wants to satisfy his senses, Krishna fulfills that desire. As far as liberation is concerned, any devotee fully engaged in the service of the Lord is already liberated. Therefore, there is no separate necessity for his liberation. Narada Muni therefore advised Dhruva Maharaj to take shelter of Vasudeva, Lord Krishna, and engage himself in the way that his mother had advised, for that would help him fulfill his desire. In this verse, Narada Muni has especially stressed the devotional service of the Lord as the only way. In other words, even if one is full of material desires, he can continue his devotional service to the Lord. and all his desires will be fulfilled. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'm grateful to be here with all of you this morning. And, you know, this is such a beautiful story of Dhruva Maharaj because it's the core of it is Dhruva Maharaj has a desire, and it's not maybe a noble desire. This is a material desire. He wants a kingdom greater than his father's. You know, the story of Dhruva Maharaj is just centered around someone who has a burning desire and he wants to fulfill that desire. And that is something we can all relate to because ultimately the function of the soul is to desire. And I was listening to a lecture the other day by His Holiness Radha Swami, and he told the story of the Yaksha and Yudhisthira. And so there's a whole backstory to it, but you know, Yudhisthira approaches this mystical lake and he's commanded to respond to this being's riddles, you know, like that he has to answer them if he wants to drink water from this lake. Otherwise, Yudhisthira will die if he drinks from this lake. And so one of the questions that this Yaksha, this being, asks Yudhisthira Maharaj is, what is more innumerable than the blades of grass? And Yudhisthira Maharaj replies, the desires that are in the heart and the mind. And last night I was taking a walk with my husband Ganesham, and we came upon this beautiful field. It was like this emerald green field lit up by the setting of the sun. And I just thought, look how many millions, probably possibly billions of blades of grass are in this one field. And that's just one field. What to speak of, you know, the city of Alachua or America or the world. Just these are, it's like innumerable, these blades of grass, these desires that are in the heart. And so it's relevant to every single one of us, this story, because we are all dealing with desires at all times, all day long. Sometimes in our dreams at 24/7, we're just dealing with desires, so innumerable. And what's mentioned in this verse is that there are 4 aims of human life. So I put them in this order: Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha. So we have Kama, which is enjoyment. That's like an aim of life. Artha, economic development. Dharma, religiosity, and then Moksha, or liberation. So these are the 4 aims of human life that are mentioned in this verse. But if you really break it down, why do people pursue economic development? To enjoy, right? It's to enjoy at a higher degree, but I want more money so I can enjoy more. And on a more refined level, even dharma or religiosity is to enjoy on a more refined level. And even on that highest level that sometimes is elevated as something selfless, it's moksha. It's actually just enjoyment to the highest degree. I'm experiencing peace, pleasure, and whatever you want to call it. But even moksha is about enjoyment. All of these aims of life keep the soul, the individual, in the center. And so they're all just various expressions of enjoyment. And they're all kama, if you really break it down. So kama and desires are very much connected. The innumerable desires in the heart and all the ways that this is expressed, how to fulfill those desires to enjoy. But the problem is that the kama of this world is just not satisfying. And an example could be, I go to a fancy restaurant and maybe everything is perfect about this restaurant. And it's beautiful. I'm wearing something beautiful. Maybe the person I went to the restaurant, they're also wearing something beautiful. The waiter, the waitress is so nice and kind and attentive. Everything is perfect. Even the food is delicious. Everything is wonderful. But I don't know if you've ever had this experience before, that you go to eat someplace and then you leave and you're still hungry. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I've had that experience, and I have that experience of being hangry because it's amazing. Like, I could be wearing the most beautiful dress and the waiter could have been the kindest, most beautiful, most handsome person. It could have been just the most ideal situation. But if I leave that restaurant hungry, I just feel hangry. I feel like it was a waste of time, waste of money, waste of energy. Why did we come here? Like say the food, the portions weren't very big or whatever it was. This has happened to me for sure, where maybe the portion's not very big and I'm like, I have to go somewhere else to get satisfied. So in this world, it's a little bit like that. It's a lot like that, actually. Because even if everything is arranged, even to this level of dharma or moksha, that it's just like perfect, it's still leaving hungry. So at the end of the day, what we're really looking for, it's very interesting. With all of this enjoyment, we're ultimately looking for satisfaction. Because if I have a desire and I get that desire fulfilled, but it's not to a full satisfaction, then it's going to be very unfulfilling and even lead to more frustration. And that's the problem with desires in this world. They're just temporary and they don't satisfy. So you could say, oh gosh, this is a problem, just all this trying to enjoy and it's always leaving me unsatisfied. But the problem is that we are always bound to have that desire to enjoy. We're seeking bliss at all times. It's the nature of the soul. And the three qualities of the soul are Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And Ananda means bliss, but it's also seeking bliss, pleasure seeking. And that's a manifestation of the soul, is why we have so many desires and that we just want to enjoy at all times, always. Because it's the nature of the soul is to feel bliss and want pleasure. So that's our nature. And so what Narada Muni is instructing Dhruva Maharaj here, he's saying that if we connect that eternal nature and that eternal tendency to want to enjoy, then approach the eternally blissful and joyful, who's Lord Krishna or Narayan. So it's a nice point here that Srila Prabhupada's making, that in ancient times that Narayan Shila, Shalagram Shila was always present at these sacrifices because it was known that the demigods truly can't fulfill desires. It's not possible. The Lord is the only one who can even make anything happen. So if he's the ultimate person to go to, then there's no need to go to other secondary sources. So it's about bringing those desires to Krishna, no matter how acceptable or unacceptable they may seem. And it was beautiful because Shamla gave a beautiful talk a couple weeks ago about, bringing every desire to Krishna, no matter how acceptable or unacceptable that desire may seem. And, we were discussing how Krishna sees all of our desires anyway. So it's not like he doesn't know what's in our hearts. It's just, let me at least bring them to Krishna. let me bring that consciousness. Another quality of the soul is chit, which is often translated as knowledge, that the soul is full of knowledge, but it's also consciousness. The soul is eternally conscious. So if I bring that consciousness into my desires, there's a purification that automatically connects me to my higher self. So it's just allowing Krishna into the process. He sees all of my desires anyway. He sees the deepest, darkest recesses of my heart. So I might as well just bring those desires to him. And with consciousness, there's that level of purification that can come into our hearts. And so I kind of want to conclude on this point of bringing our desires to Krishna, and just with some consciousness that the desire can be transformed and overcome. Not that the desire gets obliterated or desires get obliterated, because that's simply impossible, but more that our desires actually lead to satisfaction, right? That I don't leave the restaurant hungry, that I am actually experiencing satisfaction. So, in my life, I've struggled with overeating, and I've also struggled with just emotional eating when I'm not hungry. I just want to enjoy. I think possibly everyone can relate with that, but I've also struggled with some, just physical experiences of just eating too much regularly, consistently. And I remember I struggled for years with this. And many years ago, I remember I would go in the evening to see the deities, and I would sing for Radha Shamsundar at the temple. And afterward, the pujaris would come out and give Mahaprasad. So there'd be cookies and cake and puris and hot milk. And it was so delicious and not exactly the healthiest thing to have at 9:15 at night. So I remember I would go and I would have this Mahaprasad, and it was consistently that the next morning I would wake up feeling like I had a brick in my stomach. And I just felt like it wasn't digesting. I felt terrible. I felt miserable. But every night I would go and would do it all over again. And I thought, oh, this is Mahaprasad. It's still special, but it was still like almost hurting my body and my mind. And, sometimes I'd try to bring it home and have it the next day, but that didn't work often. Sometimes I'd just gather up a ton of Mahaprasad and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm taking this for my roommates, but it wasn't for my roommates. It was all for me. So I decided there was at one point where I realized I'm going to struggle with this forever. And I realized trying to stop myself from eating was not effective. And also eating was also miserable. So it was miserable to try and not eat at all, and it was miserable to eat. So I felt like a lose-lose any way I looked at it. But one night I decided, you know what? I'm just going to eat this prasadam, and all I'm going to do is just be present with every single bite. I'm going to bring my consciousness to this experience. And I'm like, I accept all the consequences, that if I wake up with a brick in my stomach tomorrow, it is what it is. So I decided to just accept and absorb the experience of relishing this Mahaprasad. And I was just present. And the next morning, for sure, I woke up feeling like I had a brick in my stomach. But I started doing this. And eventually, I felt at peace. And eventually I stopped feeling the intense pull this compulsion that I have to eat. And I felt at choice, because that is ultimately the key, that I am at choice with my desires. I'm not controlled by them, that actually I can choose what I want and what I don't want. So even knowing that if I just bring my consciousness to my desire, even if I know it's not the best for me, it's not going to lead me to the best place. If I can bring my consciousness, that in of itself is purifying. And the detachment from the feverishness to fulfill that desire is really, a satisfying experience, that like I'm at choice now. I'm not controlled by my desires. So, that's just, on that basic level. And I think that we can awaken to our highest good. And the Sanskrit used in this verse is this Shreya Atmana. And it's interesting because in the translation, let me see the translation here. It yields the fulfillment of all of these goals. Narada Muni is saying that if you engage yourself in devotional service, if you worship the lotus feet of the Lord, you will fulfill all of the goals of all of these goals of human life, if you just serve the lotus feet of the Lord. And it's beautiful because the Sanskrit is Shreya Atmana, which means the highest good for the self, meaning it's actually in the highest self-interest to serve the Lord, because there's the fullest satisfaction there. So, just as a kind of wrap up of this talk, which that, these four aims of human life really boil down to enjoyment, or kama, and satisfying desires. But when we're in the center of that enjoyment, it's just not satisfying, and it's never complete, always hungry. And so the solution really is to approach Krishna and put Krishna in the center to feel satisfied. And we can begin by taking whatever desires are already filling our hearts and our brains and our bodies, and just bring Krishna into that process and become conscious and allow him in. Because he's already aware of everything going on, but let me become conscious and allow Krishna into that process. And Ganesham was sharing with me his realization recently that, it's interesting because sometimes we have material satisfaction and then it goes away. And so there's a feeling, okay, I'm never satisfied. But sometimes we have that experience with spiritual life too. Oh, I'm in a beautiful kirtan, and then the kirtan ends and it goes away. So even the spiritual desire, spiritual fulfillment seems to be temporary, right? So it's an interesting conundrum, because isn't it supposed to be eternal? But he was saying that if that is our eternal nature, then what it feels like, oh, I had a temporary experience of spiritual life, and then I came back to my eternal experience of struggling in this material world. But what if it's completely flipped around? What if actually my experience of a spirit of the Lord and true spiritual bliss, that is eternal. And whenever I fall back down into this material experience, that is temporary. If you think about it, it's amazing. And it really was a beautiful perspective for me, because sometimes I lose some faith that, oh, well, it was a temporary spiritual experience, but that's actually what's eternal. And what's temporary is this material experience. It just feels more eternal because I keep falling back into a material experience of life. But if we realize that that is the truth, that there's a beautiful song by Bhakti Thakur that Ganesham was sharing with me, that, when you truly get to that experience of joy and bliss, he was saying how I just see joy in all four directions. It's just bliss and satisfaction and happiness. That is like my state of being. I think there's something deep in our hearts and our souls that know that that's our true nature, actually, is to be joyful at all times, and at peace and satisfied in the heart and the soul. And that is our eternal experience. And this material experience is actually temporary. Since everything about the material world is temporary, so is this experience. So it's just about increasing those windows of time where we have that spiritual experience. And the more we put Krishna in the center, almost like in our hearts, install that Narayan Shila or Shalagram Shila into our hearts, and that they're a witness to everything that we do, that the Lord is always a witness, then it's like gradually I can actually uplift my heart and have a greater ratio of the spiritual experience and realize that's my eternal nature. So a discussion question I was thinking was, what is reflect on a material desire in your heart right now that you feel comfortable bringing to Krishna, for help or guidance or fulfillment. So thinking about that one that you think you're comfortable, it's compatible with Krishna, it feels like, okay, Krishna would accept this, and something you feel comfortable bringing to him. And then also, where this is going. To reflect on a desire that you feel you do not feel comfortable bringing to Krishna. So something that you feel you might be judged for, or something that might be a little shameful, or whatever it might be, that's deep in your heart, deep, dark recesses of your heart. So, what does that feel and look like? So what does the one you feel comfortable, and then the one you're not so comfortable bringing to Krishna? And I was thinking, the ones that we're not comfortable bringing to Krishna tend to be a little bit more numerable, at least in my estimation, because we think, oh, it's material, so that's not acceptable to desire that. So just your experience, and by no means do you need to share, what that desire was, but maybe just what the experience is like, in reflecting upon that process of material desires, and how to bring Krishna bring some consciousness into your desires. So thank you so much, and I will stop this recording.